Hey everyone, welcome to Nibiru's podcast called Wavelengths. I'm Jonathan in Strategy and Ops, and this is Brandon. We're pretty excited to be introducing the podcast to you today. First, we'll start off with an introduction of Brandon, and we'll dive a bit into the name and talk about some example topics that we'll go through the course of the guests that come online.
Hey everyone.
Brandon, you want to take it away?
Yeah, for sure. Hey everyone, excited to be here. My name is Brandon and I'm the head of growth at Nibiru. Been with the team for a little over a year and a half now, leading the go-to-market and growth initiatives for the org. A lot of the focus we have here at Nibiru right now is around the multi-VM, really kickstarting the EVM side, and also really building a foundation for real yield and structured products. That's a big part of our bread and butter. Um, and so really evangelizing for and just building towards adoption and growing community at Nibiru. So excited to be here and excited to be chatting more broadly about topics in the space in both crypto, but also non-crypto related. So excited to be here.
First off, on the name Wavelengths, it's essentially thinking about within a lot of noise in news and signals and trends. We like to tune through that static and sort of pick out which voices actually matter. But Nibiru's podcast itself will be a bit more general purpose. So it will obviously tilt a bit crypto native given the course of the type of people that work within the ecosystem. But we're hoping to touch upon any sort of topics within our life. So that could be related to traditional finance. So how the org setup is at a bank, research, sales, and trading. You could talk about structured products, venture capital, seed stage investing in YC, behavioral economics. You could look at a lot of emerging technologies. So we do focus a lot on that where, on the chain side, there's consensus design and optimization. There's quantum computing that people talk about that will break crypto. At the same time, there's zero knowledge proofs, which are said to be, quantum resistant. In an age of institutionals increasingly entering crypto, whether ZK will be relevant with privacy, AI and foundation models are obviously pretty topical. I think one example of this in recent news, as we're talking now at the end of May of 2025, OpenAI just purchased Johnny Ive's startup for $6.5 billion. So whether AI will come in the form of a small hardware gadget for us in the coming months to years is also something interesting to look at. Google did a release of its Veo 3. We're seeing a lot of video generations, videos all over the internet. Claude did Opus 4, and OpenAI did a Codex, for example. This week was also Bitcoin Finance conference in Las Vegas. So you've seen a couple chains that are a bit more focused on bringing Bitcoin to their ecosystem, Sui and Starknet and Nibiru inclusive in that. We could talk about general business topics, whether it's related to startups, from idea building to traction. We could talk about management concepts, how to lead teams and community that we've seen, and general philosophy, cultural shifts, how to learning how to learn, macro. We're seeing a lot of use with trade wars, US, China, Japan carry trade, at gold as a rising asset class, and how that ties back to Bitcoin. I think all of these are very relevant as we forecast how to think about, strategy, ecosystem, projects to partner alongside, and in general, just for personal curiosity. But there'll be a couple more crypto native topics, and I'll let Brandon talk about some of those.
Yeah, for sure. So Jonathan just brought up a good point about the recent conference with Bitcoin Vegas. Obviously, in the last year and a half to 2 years, we're seeing a lot of excitement towards LRT products, specifically related to Bitcoin. And what exactly does that mean? That means being able to bridge over a lot of the idle capital that kind of lingers with a lot of the OG Bitcoin whales that have been holding since the OG days, but haven't really found ways to be able to deploy their capital most efficiently. These LRTs, liquid restaking tokens, are essentially giving people a vehicle to be able to invest in a lot of DeFi products that, few years ago prior, like they weren't able to do so. Like typically you would have had to, bridge into, or, honestly, you had to swap into Bitcoin from Bitcoin into Ethereum and then bridge over to whatever specific protocol you wanted to. conduct your DeFi activities on. I think a lot of the focus, at least in some of the conferences we've gone to, we were just in New York as well for Digital Asset Summit, and we heard just a lot of the buzz around excitement around both RWAs and really just utilizing the power and security of the Bitcoin ecosystem and bringing that over to EVM. And that's been, a lot of the talk of the town. Part of the reason why a lot of our strategy and go to market is really centered around the Bitcoin LRTs. So working with, projects like Hyperlane to be able to bridge over B Squared's token to then, utilize Bitcoin LRTs in more sophisticated structured products. We'll be seeing that in the coming few weeks to about a month on Nibiru. So really excited for that. I think, it brings up a lot of strong use cases and validity into the space. People have been always looking for ways to streamline their ways of earning yield, whether it's, traditional 4.5% via T-bills, in Web2, but also in folks that are based in the US. We're typically accustomed to your traditional high yield savings account. And, when I talk to like my family members, they're always raving about and are excited about those yield opportunities. But when they kind of bring up the topics of, ability to earn those yields in addition to, boosted yields or whatnot, it sounds almost ridiculous, if not, like unreal, right? But the reality is, so long as you're working with the right players, you're not overly dependent on things like token inflation, and the yield is actually, you actually know where the yield is coming from. There's a lot of cool DeFi dynamics that can really come into play. So at least for us, and not to overly shill Nibiru on this podcast, we are really just focusing on doubling down on that. But also, and of course, later in the podcast, we can also dabble in things on go to market with like the UI UX side and kind of streamlining the user experience. But we are, really doubling down on that. So glad to hear the sentiment with, at least for the Bitcoin LRT side, is fairly positive. RWAs too, especially have been extremely noteworthy. Seeing a lot of explosion, especially within the real estate markets and folks wanting to invest in alternative assets. At us, like we've been chatting with a few protocols on the synthetic security side to be able to offer things like Apple, Tesla on a DeFi protocol, which would be pretty incredible to see. Things that you would want to identify though is ensuring you have, streamlined liquidity to be able to fund those types of markets, because then you'll be able to do things like perps and whatnot. So excited to kind of dabble into those topics a bit, but I know JY has a few other things to go on about.
Yeah, I mean, within that specific point of advanced DeFi strategies, I mean, I think this week Euler Swap was announced from Euler, and that enabled like an integration with UniV4 hooks. That was pretty exciting because you can now not only rehypothecate, collateral between vaults within Euler as a modular lending protocol, but you could also use Euler Swap LP positions as collateral. So the analogy you could sort of use here is, imagine if you had a house and then you could reuse the collateral into multiple scenarios, and then you can get, in some ways it's increasing leverage, but it's also a bit more capital efficient and increased yields. If you combine that with some other narratives you're seeing in crypto, like ease of use with, liquid staking tokens, LSTs, and how that makes it simplified to be able to get to just simply stake, to have that action, yield bearing tokens, which essentially provides yield through the form of vaults. And then you're thinking about, the DeFi mullet, where banks are increasingly, or any sort of fintechs are increasingly offering crypto and then abstracting DeFi on the back end. It's pretty interesting to see like all these complicated DeFi strategies, and you're finally seeing the pathway in which it moves towards retail and normal people, where the complexity isn't as large of a factor. Of course, we'll take a look at some of these trends in the course of planning out our strategy, working with the business development team. They're always in the process of meeting new projects, and we do encourage people to reach out and continue talking to us if there are any ideas that they might have. We have a request for proposals in terms of ideas, and we also have requests for community in terms of like, cultural sort of endeavors we want to do on Nibiru, inclusive of NFTs and such. But for the most part, we wanted to just simply talk about what the future might look like for future podcasts, and talk about some relevant topics that were on the mind as of this week. But without further ado, I mean, that's Nibiru Wavelengths, and we're pretty excited.
Happy to have you on the wavelength.
Oh yeah.